I will go ahead and get us started here while the room fills up. So thank you so much for joining us wherever you are in the world today. My name is Kari Mugo, and I am the digital media and public engagement consultant at Mawazo Institute. I am also the host and moderator of this fantastic webinar we're going to be having today. We're hosting a discussion that we are calling African in the Ivory. It's an event organized by the Mawazo Institute and Fallen Walls Engage. If you are not familiar with the Mawazo Institute, we are a Nairobi-based nonprofit research organization that is interested in supporting the capacity of African women to pursue PhDs in STEM and early career research. We also are very invested in policy engagement and public engagement. One of the ways we do this is through events such as this. And the reason that we're such enthusiasts of, engagement with science in the policy sphere and the public sphere is because we just believe science has such great potential to do good. And the more we can get it out into the broader world and out of the ivory, the more beneficial it is for us, particularly on the continent. We think science can really be used to solve a lot of the intractable challenges that we're facing at this time. And so for Africa Day, we wanted to really celebrate African scientists, but also build into conversations that have been taking place alongside events that are happening across the globe. So for us, the African in the Ivory conversation really began for us at the beginning of last year, or rather the middle of last year, when there was the shooting of a young man, George Floyd, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And today is actually the 1-year anniversary of the shooting. And we started to see a lot of conversations happening around, systemic racism and the barriers that Black people are still facing in various sectors of society. And we saw a conversation emerge that was called Black in the Ivory. And so a lot of Black academics in the United States and in other parts of the world were starting to talk about the specific barriers that they were facing as well as academics within this space. And we started to think to ourselves, what is the experience of being an African in the Ivory? And how do we bring this conversation home and really indigenize it and start to talk about what challenges we need to overcome in order for Africans to feel fully included in this global scientific enterprise, and at the same time for the capacity for Africa to fully innovate. So this is what African in the Ivory started out as, and this is the conversation that we're now continuing within this space. And in the last year, we've seen a lot of opportunities where science is doing so much good, but also we're in the space where we're also seeing how limited the goods that science produces. We saw a vaccine get developed in record time, and that was a very big win for all of us. But at the same time, as I sit here in South Africa, I don't have a clear idea of when people like me will be able to access these life-saving medications. When we look at what is happening in India at the moment, and we see all of these deaths, and the people who are producing the vaccines and manufacturing them are still not able to access them, there's a thing there that needs to be talked about, and we need to think about how do we make sure that science is really a science for all, and that it is accomplishing what science is intended to do, which is really do good in the world. And so this is the conversation we're going to be having today. And I have with me 4 amazing panelists who I will introduce to you. So our first panelist is Shisa. Anne is a Malawian currently based in South Africa. Thank you, Anne. She is an agricultural scientist. She is a storyteller. She's a STEM podcaster, and she's currently pursuing a PhD in crop science at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. She's very passionate about the sciences and showcasing the very many wonderful careers and opportunities that are available in the STEM field. Anne is a former Black Women in Science South Africa Fellow and the founder of the Root of the Science podcast. Our next panelist that I will be introducing is Ngina Judy. Ngina, please give us a wave. Great. Ngina is joining us from Nairobi, and she is a 2021 Mawazo Learning Exchange Fellow and a community development enthusiast. She's currently pursuing her PhD in gender and development at the University of Nairobi in Kenya. And her research is specifically seeking to understand the existing gender dynamics and how they affect the uptake of new technologies and methodologies in agriculture. Her research offers recommendations for sustainable solutions that can address gender gaps in agriculture. And Judy also works as a child protection officer in Dadaab refugee camp, where she helps ensure that children seeking asylum in Kenya live a dignified life. Thank you so much for joining us, Ngina. The next panelist I'm going to introduce is Dr. Esten Goombing. Thank you for the wave, Dr. Ngumbi. So Dr. Ngumbi is an author, a researcher, an educator, a mentor, a speaker, and a champion for change around issues of hunger, gender, education, youth, activism, agriculture, sustainability, and public service. She does it all. She has a PhD in entomology from Auburn University, and she's currently an assistant professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where she teaches entomology and African American studies. Dr. Ngumbi is also the founder of Oyeska Greens and Spring Break Kenya. She is very passionate about using her intellect to solve for social inequalities. Then last but definitely not least, I have Dr. Fiona Moejes. Fiona, give us a wave. Great. Dr. Fiona is the Director of Programs at Mawazo Institute. She has extensive experience developing and implementing multi- and transdisciplinary projects that are focused on marine biotechnology, sustainable agriculture, and seafood traceability in Europe, as well as science-based and community-led marine conservation. I always struggle with that. Initiatives in the Comoros and in Kenya. Fiona also continues to support innovative thinking in marine conservation by providing support to local organizations in Watamu. She's very passionate about ensuring that African women in science and women leaders are at the forefront of addressing global and African challenges. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. I'm really excited to have this discussion with you today. As a quick reminder for folks who are joining us on Zoom or watching the live stream, we have a Q&A button at the bottom of your toolbar where you can submit some questions for us that we will then respond to at the end of this discussion. You can also participate in the conversation online by tagging us at Mawazo Institute. We are on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Our hashtags have been shared in the chat, African in the Ivory, Nairobi Ideas Exchange, and Fallen Wall Hubs, Kenya. So I wanted to start with sort of setting the scene about this conversation we're going to have. And so we had some poll questions that we wanted to, give to our attendees and just really see what people know and where they're at in terms of understanding some of the challenges that we're having around equity. So we have some poll questions prepared. Ruth, if you could please just assist me with putting those up. Great. So the first question that we had is a test on, how much do you know about female researchers on the continent? So what do you think what is the average percentage of female researchers on the continent? Is it A, 29.3%, B, 31.8%, C, 15.2%? And I'll just give folks a second or two to submit their responses to this. The correct answer is 31.8%. 29.3 is actually the global average. So Sub-Saharan Africa tends to do a little bit better than the global average, but still very, very, very far beneath where we need to be in terms of representation of women in the sciences. Then the second question we have here is, on average, how much do African countries invest in scientific research? So is it 0.4%, and this is a percentage of their GDP? 2.2% or 1.6%. People have been studying. I love this. Okay. So question 2, the correct answer is 0.4%. So 2.2% is what higher income countries tend to spend on R&D, and 1.6% is the global average. So we are, as a continent, performing way beneath, what is the global average and what, higher income countries are doing. So there's definitely a funding shortage here that we're facing. Then the third question was, which of the following countries has the highest vaccination rate? I actually heard this on a podcast this week, and I was pleasantly surprised. So a lot of people have voted Singapore, and the correct answer is actually Seychelles. Seychelles has the highest vaccination rate in the world currently. A big part of that is that it is a much smaller country than these other regions, and so vaccination is easier to take place. So, our last question, our last two questions. In your opinion, do you believe it's harder for scientists to carry out research on the continent? And we have 90% of people saying yes and 10% saying no. Okay, and then the very last question was, what is the greatest challenge to Africa's ability to innovate? There is no right or wrong answer here. We just wanted to get to understand what people were thinking. So we had access to research, technology, and infrastructure. Lack of funding is emerging as one of the biggest challenges that people are identifying in the audience, and I think many of us can agree with that. Bias towards foreign innovation and research, I think I definitely agree with that as well. And then lack of collaboration on the continent is being rated as the very least of these challenges of the four options we offered. Okay, this is very helpful to just know where we are in terms of our thinking and some of the challenges that we think are some of the most pressing. So thank you so much for that poll, Ruth, and for assisting me with that. So with that in mind, I'm just going to go ahead and start our discussion here. And I had prepped Dr. Ngumbi right before this that I would be coming directly to her. Dr. Ngumbi has a very interesting and inspirational background around her science journey. She talks about her experience growing up in the coastal region of Kenya and how this influenced her desire to, go into science. And so I wanted you to maybe talk to me a little bit more about why you chose science as, the solution to the issues that you saw, and why not politics, for instance, or entrepreneurship, why science as a tool for you?
So thanks, Kari, and the Mawazo Institute, and everyone that's tuning in to this discussion that's so important and a topic that's close to my heart because I'm a scientist. And believe you me, on that number, 31.8% is low. That means that when you go to a room and there are 10 of you, most chances are you'll be the only person that is in the room, the only Black person, and sometimes only woman in the room. So growing up, I grew up in the Kenyan coast, and my parents were educators, primary school teachers to be exact. And to supplement their small earnings, we would farm. So we farmed before going to school. And we farmed very hard. I remember we'd wake up and just go and farm. And I loved farming at that point also. But then I would continue to watch the crops grow. But then halfway through the season, insects would come and they would almost take away much of our food. And at times when insects wouldn't take our food, drought would. At other years, it would be flooding. And other years, it would be a combination of both. And that would mean that all our hard work, I would watch it just go to waste. And as a young child, it meant that probably we would not have lunch or would have skipped dinner. And they started building these images. First of all, what are these insects and why are they eating our food to begin with? And can they just even share with us? And so I started to really want to make a connection of what insects are and how can I learn about them in a way that I can be able to ensure that our crops grow healthy, happy, all through to the growth cycle, and we can harvest. So at that early point, I wanted to really pursue a career that would allow me to tackle this challenge that was taking away our food from our family. But I also realized that it wasn't only my family, neighbors, my community, later to learn that it's not only around the Kenyan different counties. And then I realized that across the African continent, it's a big challenge. And so, but then of course the numbers, as we already mentioned, they were so low. So also growing up, so I want to find this career. But at the same time, there are people that I'm exposed to all along who are accountants, nurses, doctors. So there was that conflict. Is like, and I was telling Kari earlier that I actually wanted to be an accountant. Reason being because I'll go with my parents to collect their paychecks. I would watch these accountants putting their dresses, and they were sitting in air conditioned room. And I'm like, that is the career I want to. But at the same time, I want a career that I can be able to actually solve the challenges that my family was facing. So luck was it that I ended up doing well and being invited to do a Bachelor of Science at Kenyatta University and biochemistry and zoology. And so I started asking these questions. I was being very curious in my classes, in my lab. And I believe that also my professors started to note that I was really very curious about insects, and I wanted to do something. And so then, thankfully, my professors became good mentors, and they were able to actually lead my way, lead my curiosity in the right direction. And so being at Kenyatta University, we were close to the International Center of Insect Physiology and Ecology, a very world-renowned institute that addresses insect problems for the African continent. And so I was able to actually now get into and meet the scientists, meet the entomologists. And then I was like, okay, that is it. I am studying insects, and I am going to not only just study this basic, but find ways to address food insecurity challenges that are brought about by insects, and of course other challenges, drought stress, flooding stress. And that still is my career today, and that will be my career until I find these challenge answers and solutions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Ngumbi. I think it's just always interesting to hear how people, come about their academic journeys. It always starts somewhere else and then ends up, somewhere entirely unexpected most of the times. And you bring up, something that I think is very interesting, the notion that you didn't see a lot of scientists growing up, right? You saw accountants. And so, Anne, if I could come over to you, when we picture a scientist, and I think you actually said this to me, so I'm asking you a question back to you. For many of us, the first image isn't of an African, right, or of a woman. There's clearly a visibility problem that we have here. So how do you think we can, help correct for some of this so that, the next young Dr. Ngumbi, when she's somewhere going to the bank, there's also maybe a scientist on her way to the bank, and she thinks to herself, I can be an accountant and a scientist. How do we correct for this invisibility of African scientists?
Thank you so much, Kari. I'm very honored to be here, firstly. It's a great pleasure to talk amongst these other women about a very important topic. About what you said about visibility, you are absolutely right. It's when I was growing up, I agree with Dr. Esther. I didn't even want to be a scientist. I didn't even know that was such a thing. I wanted to be a lawyer. Why? Because I saw shows about law, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. This is something that I want to be. So first things first, I firmly believe that you can't aspire it's very hard for you to aspire to be something that you can't see. First things first. So the things that you are seeing are kind of the things that kind of drives you in terms of what you want to do. So for me, that was always that is the motivating factor for me for starting, for example, my podcast. I wanted to create a platform where we can create visible role models, not only for young people, but also people like me. Like we said earlier on, that it's the stats in terms of women in science are little, people of color in science are little, and worse, knowing that there are other Africans who are doing whatever you're doing, it's very hard for us to connect. So the purpose of the podcast was that I wanted to create a platform where Africans all over the world can talk about their research firstly, and all their projects, whatever they're into, in a manner that everyday people can understand what they're doing. Because I also think it's important that we don't only keep the science amongst scientists. It needs to be with other people. It needs to be with my mom, who knows nothing about science, or my 10-year-old sister who can look at it and be like, oh my word, this is something that I want to do. So the whole purpose of creating visibility is that creating visible role models where a young African child can see, oh my word, this is somebody from Benin. They are now in Spain. You know, that you're not limited to where you are. So that is my drive, that is my push. And it's been such a pleasure kind of being the medium with these type of conversations and showcasing all of these amazing people and I think the best part for me is that it's us, it's Africans, it's people who look like me, who sound like me, who are me. Like, I can see myself in them. So yeah, that is literally one of the best things that I've done so far, and I'm really, really honored that I get to do that.
Oh, I'm just going to plug your podcast one more time. It's called The Root of the Science Podcast. Anne is doing a fantastic job. She's 72 episodes in. As someone who's trying to be a podcast producer, I fully salute you. And I feel the enthusiasm of just being able to see other people who look like you, and what that does for you in a field where you're already marginalized a little bit, or, you know, not really the dominant people in this space. And so, Ngina, if I could throw it to you, you're currently, a PhD candidate at the University of Nairobi. And so you're very much in the space of, becoming the next generation of scientists. And I'm wondering if you have some ideas about how we can support more women and African students at the graduate level, so that we can have more people that look like us doing science.
Thank you so much, Kari, the panelists, and all of us joining us today. What we can do to be able to support female scientists would be, number one, like what Mawazo is doing right now, giving focused attention to females, and not only females, because we also have underrepresentation when it comes to people living with disability. We don't really get to hear much about scientists who are living with disability. Like, for example, if you hear Einstein, that's a name that you reckon with. You've heard it 1,001 times. But when you hear of Steve Hawking, I'm not pretty sure how many of us have heard about him. He was a scientist who was living with disability. So just giving a focused attention to the marginalized or the underrepresented group in general, not necessarily women per se. We could also have mentorship programs that focus to build the capacities of women who want to venture out into science-related fields. We could also have the one-on-one peer sessions, the groups that encourage each other to come against our individual and institutional limitations that there are as it is per se. So, like for example, encouraging women to publish, that could be able to inform policy. Like, for example, currently what we see happening in our Kenyan space now, our constitution that was enacted in 2010 provides for a gender bill to be in place. And it had a couple of 5 years after the constitution was enacted. But up until now, it has been almost 10, going to 11 years. And we still don't have a gender bill. So what are the problems that are then facing the space and the lack of implementation of such bills or legislations that could thrive or encourage women that are in the science field? So encouraging women to publish more, write more policy briefs, and then be able to communicate these policy briefs or these research findings in the correct spaces, and this would help in improving the representation of female or the underrepresented groups in the research or the science space. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ngina, and I really appreciate, you drawing this parallel that they are underrepresented groups outside of, just racial categories and gender categories, that, we also have individuals living with disabilities, individuals who, might have different learning abilities. And so we need to broaden the conversation when we're talking about equity and not just limit it to gender and race, and really consider all the different people who can contribute, make contributions towards science, and who are maybe being left out or don't have the resources or the right frameworks, the right support. So I think that's a really important thing to pull out. And you also note that, we need to encourage publications by women. And one thing that has emerged as a result of the pandemic the last year is that there has been far less publications by women. That's just because of this unequal sharing of responsibilities in the home. As many of us went back into our homes during lockdowns and curfews, we saw a lot of women unable to, continue or further their research or continue or further whatever papers they were working at. So this sort of speaks to the larger frameworks that we need to be able to support women and underrepresented groups to be successful within academia. I think one of the things that we often tend to see, and Fiona, I'm coming to you, is that we tend to see this divide where it almost feels like it's difficult to be a successful scientist on the continent, right? So that's the question we had around, how do you think it's more difficult to be a scientist here? And so what tends to happen for many of our top scientists is that they tend to go overseas, whether that's for their studies or whether that's to continue their research or, get some other collaborative project. And I just wanted to hear from you, does it matter that many of our scientists end up finding themselves overseas, and what can we do secondary to that question to sort of enable and highlight local success stories?
Thank you so much, Kari. This is a very interesting topic because a lot of us are educated abroad, and we're coming back with knowledge, ideas, and we want to bring them home basically and implement here. I think the one thing that we have to remember is that there is a sort of transitionary or translationary thing that has to happen. Like all the ideas and knowledge, experience that you might have abroad has to fit to the local context. It has to fit to, if coming back to Kenya or coming back to South Africa, it has to fit to that local context. The power with building an environment, an ecosystem, a world where African research is coming from African institutions by Africans in Africa, addressing African problems. That is what we need to, that's what our goal is. That's what we're moving towards. Because then we can really tailor the research we're doing. We can tailor the methods we use, the technologies we use, even the information we're gathering. We're working with people whom this research is going to directly affect. So we're able to include them and have them in that discussion. So you don't have to be a scientist to do science or influence science, and if we had institutions here that had the same amount of, this kind of prestige, if we had this faith in our own institutions that we do for institutions abroad. And I think one of the questions in the poll was do we feel like everything done abroad is better? And we need to change that thinking. We need to rewire people and get them thinking that we can do science here and we can do science our way, addressing our problems. So whilst, this is it's a period of change. There is people still who are, studying abroad and bringing their research back home. That's still going to happen. And we welcome that. It's not that it's not welcomed, but it has to fit in and translate to the context of where you're coming back to or coming home to. So yeah, I think this is what we're trying to do. I think all of us have that in us, that we want to improve not only the African women scientists being shown on, whether that's in TV shows or on kids shows, on radios, on podcasts. It's also changing, the institutions themselves and building them up. We're doing all of this to build up the reputation of our institutions so that we have faith in them. And, we can really do science here by us on our own soil. So I think that's where we really want to go. I'd love to hear what the other panelists think, but what can we do to kind of make those things happen and really build up that faith in our own institutions and our own research institutions?
I think that's a great question, Fiona. I'm going to elect someone to maybe offer some thoughts. Dr. Esther, you're currently working in academic spaces. You're a professor. I mean, you're very much in the sort of like higher ed institutions we're talking about. How do we increase, I guess, faith and trust in the institutions that we have here, that they are as good as? What's the work to be done there?
No, I think first of all, I'm still gonna give credit because I'm a product of those same institutions. I'm a product of Kenyatta University, so I appreciate that. I think we're doing something, and they're also doing something right because they are still collaborating with an international institution. But I think yes, and I think Kenyatta University has really transformed, and so I think we're doing it. We are getting there. We may be slow. Yes, but I think when I look at 20 years ago, when I went to Kenyatta University, today it's an institution that's still upgraded. So of course we want it to go a little bit quicker because the challenges continue to be extreme. The challenges continue to really just compound, and we need to move at a truly a supersonic speed. So there's a need to truly just get going. We have behind. So I think to build our institution, of course, is I think those collaborations, because I mean Kenya has so many of the international centers, CGIAR centers, the International Center of Insecurity, and these are all we have internationals that are living in the country doing science, and so I think if our universities collaborate and they start sharing of resources, and these institutes, I mean these international centers have the best of the recent technology. So there's no saying that the equipment is still down the standards. So they have the up to the standards equipment. They're doing science. They're publishing every other year. So definitely we have that capacity. I think leadership within our African-based universities to ensure that interaction, and then they can also continue to upgrade the facilities so that students don't only have to go and do this research in these institutions, they can do it at their local university. And then we also have to continue spreading through to the rural communities, because and start, getting the culture of science. Because of course we can't expect also scientists to be scientists if you're only going to get access to science when you get at the university stage. So we have to also look at our syllabus. We also are creating scientists, nurturing curiosity at early age, or we are allowing, and we know if we haven't nurtured that curiosity from the early age, we are not going to have scientists. And we can't wait on luck for people that science picks by chance. We have to be very intentional, very strategic, and it is up to all of us. It's not up to the leaders. It's going to be up to me, Kari, Fiona, everybody, Anne, to do our part, to encourage those in our circles to do our part. When we all realize that it's up to us, nobody else will uplift our African research standards. When we all decide, we will make it happen.
That's very powerful, Dr. Esther. I think you bring up a very important point, Dr. Esther, around this culture of science. And for me, this sort of speaks to this larger communication problem that I think science tends to have. It can be very insulated. And Anne, I'm coming over to you because by virtue of like the kind of work that it is, it requires this sort of academic rigor, and it requires this jargon and this language, and that tends to exclude very many people. And this is speaking as a non-scientist, people who would benefit from its findings, people who would benefit from its uptake. And so I'm wondering, Anne, how can we move discussions around STEM out of the Ivory and into community learning spaces? Do you have any ideas around how we can sort of solve this communication issue that science has?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think in terms of how, like you said, that science is very exclusive. But I think for me, it also goes down in terms of how are we communicating the science, the whole term of science communication. Science communication is also needs to be inclusive, like how Dr. Esther mentioned, that how I communicate science to, for example, a child in the urban areas. Maybe I could communicate it using TikTok videos. That will get her involved, but that will not work for a child who is in the rural areas. I mean, of course, there's no data there. What are they going to do? How do we bring them in as well? So as much as we are communicating the science and we want to engage all these other people, we need to communicate it in a way that it includes everybody. So I remember there was a video that I watched by this lady called Tamanda Kaunda. She is a doctor and also an agribusiness lady. And she was just basically talking about how, for example, when you have these pamphlets or these FAA pictures, and you've got like an old lady who's from the rural areas and you're trying to tell people to do agriculture. So she said, why are you putting that type of picture to people in the rural areas? How will that make them want to do agriculture? So she was challenging that, let's put somebody, for example, me, I do agriculture. Why am I not on the picture of the FAO and taking it to the rural areas? That will put that little image in a child's head to be like, oh my word, this is where I can aspire to be. So I think in terms of how we communicate the science, we need to coax it in a way that will include everybody, and the way that you do it in a manner that can, like appetize the person, because I think sometimes, for example, I'm going to speak with agriculture because that's what I know and that's what I'm in. For example, when I speak with my friends, when I tell them I'm doing agriculture, they're like, oh my God, you're going to be a farmer, you're going to play in the dirt. But there's more to that. There's people who work in the labs, they're plant breeders, there are people who do plant pathology, they do innovative, they work with amazing equipment. So the way that we are putting these images in terms of what these different science careers are needs to be in a manner that you can see, again, visible role models, people who you can see yourself to, who you can aspire to be. So I think for me, that will always be the key word, like make it inclusive, and also teach. Another important thing also is teach scientists how to communicate the science properly. We use such fancy jargon, but, and also when we as scientists are trying to tell people, we communicate scientists, for example, for a conference, let's communicate in a manner that we can speak to our friends who are not in science. I can speak to my aunties and uncles who are not in science. So we also need to watch the language, apart from making it appetizing and looking beautiful, but the language is also very important.
Thank you so much, Anne. And I think, this is something that Mawazo, again, is very interested in doing. It's how do we, take budding researchers and teach them how to communicate their science while they're still, pursuing their PhDs, and before you get into the institution and a certain way of thinking and doing and being. And I also appreciate that you, as a recently new PhD candidate, 6 months into your program, are already, applying these practices and these tools around science communication. So we've really focused on like the uptake of science, and I want to shift a little bit and think through how can we use science to actually then engender equity within society. And Ngina, I'm coming over to you. Your work is very much at this nexus of gender and development, which is that we will not have sustainable development and long-term development unless it is also gender sensitive. And so drawing from your own work, I want to hear from you, what do we stand to lose if we don't take a science for all approach? Ngina, if you could please respond to that question.
Thank you so much, Kari, for that important highlight. Let me just begin by a general overview of research that was done by the World Bank, and that was gender in architecture. They say the World Bank stated that majority of the urban cities have been developed by men and for men. And if we just take a rough, overview of our city, Nairobi, I'm not pretty sure whether Anne or the other panelists or those that are present today have been in Nairobi, but let me just use that as an example today. Sometimes you're walking in Nairobi and you're wondering, who are these who designed this city? And it is interesting to note that if the World Bank can then, just try to understand the importance of bringing in the gender dynamics into a field like architecture, one that no one maybe would have thought would be necessary, it is something we need to think about. So coming back to my research, it talks about the nexus between gender, agriculture, climate change, and food security, all those in one basket. And what I'm just trying to explore is the position of women in this space of agriculture, and what are the tools that they have at hand that put them at an advantage or at a disadvantage. And some of the aspects I explore in my research are the access to extension services, for example, and this means of communication for us, for the rural woman to know that maybe an extension officer is coming tomorrow. How then do they get this information? Majority of the times in many of our homes, the woman is in the kitchen and the man is watching news. So maybe the modern woman would revamp the kitchen and put maybe a television screen, and maybe as she's cooking, she would watch the news too. So sometimes women tend to lose out on important information that then puts them at a disadvantage. I'm also exploring some of the policies that revolve around land and who is that own this property, because agriculture is not done on faith. We need land for us to do agriculture. So who is this that owns this means of production? And who has the title deed? Who dictates what is planted on that piece of land? And what then can you be able to do to revise these policies that also talk about inheritance of family land? Majority of our cultural practices is the male child inherits the land. So do our women have the land to practice this agriculture that you're talking about in the first place? I also seek to explore issues to do with access to finance. It was interesting to note that a long time ago, a woman would have to accompany the husband, have the photocopy of the ID of the husband for her to even access a loan. It is up until recently that a woman can walk into the bank and get access to finance. But what are these collaterals that are being requested? A title deed. How many women have title deeds? How many women have car logbooks for them to be able to access these finances? So such are what are being discussed in my research. And in terms of recommendations, then, what are some of these policies that we can be able to put in place? And it was interesting to note that a policy that one would consider very basic, like the gender bill, did not even get quorum for it to be able to be enacted. So how then will it be difficult for us to get access to land rights, for example, if something as simple as a gender bill will not be enacted, that is constitutional, that has been enacted in the Constitution of Kenya. So that brings me then to the idea that we need more representation into Parliament. And we now see the affirmative action has brought in more women, and the 12th Parliament has brought in a number, like we made history in 2013 by having 83 women in Parliament. That is a number that was never seen in history. Like combine all years since independence, we only had 25 women in leadership. So, and still, these 86%, are we able to achieve the policy reforms that we require? Do we just have flower girls in Parliament, or we are having women who can champion for our rights and for our for the reforms that we want to see in place? So in as much as we are talking about the affirmative action and pushing for our voices to be heard, do we have the right women in these positions of leadership? So yeah, that is it in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ngina. I think that the notion of, leadership is really crucial. And for those who don't have context, the gender bill is a bill in Kenya that is supposed to mandate that there can be no more than 2/3 of any particular gender within elected positions. And the MPs and the powers that be have just refused to sit and actually bring this bill into life. And I just, reflecting on this experience of working on gender and development, Fiona, I think you work on an area that is increasingly gaining traction, which is conservation. And you work in, the marine space, which I think also is just, you don't see a lot of women that I know of, a lot of Africans that I know of in this particular space. And I'm just wondering, based off of the things that Ngina has said, if you have any reflections around, how this looks different in the space that you're operating in, or some of the barriers, challenges, just responding to what Ngina has said in your own area of expertise, please.
Thank you, Kari. I think I'm just going to echo a lot that has already been said. And it's this idea of representation. There's just not many African or Black women in the marine conservation / marine biology space. There's just not many of us. And it's not something like exactly the same thing of as a child, how many, Black women, marine biologists did you see? Marine biology in general. I mean, I don't remember seeing it much. And also, I think and this is just a personal kind of view on things. I think in the marine biology, which is a very, very broad field, but in general, it's kind of linked to something that isn't for us, kind of a thing. You don't see many Africans doing this research, really. I think that it is changing. I think that it's definitely changing. There's definitely, as we gain more interest in general, understanding the importance of our oceans in general is now starting to draw a lot more people from different disciplines, applying it to marine biology based research and projects and ideas. That I would say that's probably the main thing. Main thing is it's just not much representation, and it's easy to reach for something or strive for something when you can see that it can be done, and it's probably easier to think that like, okay, I can do that too. Why not? I have an interest in it. And I think, I think I'll leave it at that. I hope I've answered the question, but yeah.
Yes. Thanks, Fiona. You have responded to my question. And so I think what this brings for me, what brings to mind is this notion of this thing called the diversity innovation complex, which is that a lot of innovations by minority groups tend to be undervalued or overlooked. It's the same thing if a white man were to present an idea versus an African man, one is taken as more valuable than the other. And it's this sort of like slippery slope of who gets to have access to innovation, right? Who is allowed to innovate. And you've worked in a variety of different settings. You've worked in Ireland, you've worked in Kenya, you've worked in the Comoros. And I'm wondering about your own particular experiences, particularly in this very unique field where, as you state, there's just not a lot of people like you. So what is your experience coming up against this complex, and do you have any experiences with it, I suppose? Yes.
Yeah, for sure. It's something that, and I'm sure I'm not the only person, but when you are doing your research as a PhD student, even, you felt that, at least I did, I felt I had to work that little bit more, that little bit harder than everyone else, just to prove that like the research I'm doing is also valuable or important. And this, I don't know what the complex societal thing behind it, why I felt that like I had to just do more. I didn't just have to do my research. I had to do my research plus, I had to do my research plus help out with organizing conferences or whatever. I had to do extra so that I could gain the same recognition as somebody just doing probably just their research, which is not, I'm just saying just your research. It's a lot of work just to research, but, I just felt like I always had to do that little bit more just to get the same kind of recognition. And I think that kind of sticks with you. You continue to do that. I mean, there is, with the internet and everything and email, it's so easy to just, hide behind your email, and somebody hasn't even seen your face. They don't know what you look like. And I found there's been a couple of instances where I've done some kind of collaborative projects or whatever, and it's all based on this communication and collaborating over email. And then they meet me for the first time either at a project meeting or over a video call. And it's almost like they just have like a moment of like, really, is that her? I mean, my name doesn't sound that African, you know. So it's like, it was, you know, this you know, the shock on that kind of face, like, really, is it her that I've been talking to with all this research? And it always made me think, are they now doubting the quality of the research I've done up to date, or the quality of our collaboration to date? Has it affected it? And it plays with your confidence. So like, even when you've got exciting ideas that you want to use to solve problems, which is, I think, as researchers, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to solve problems, and we've got ideas that we're bringing to the table to solve these problems. And if you feel that your ideas might not be good enough, and you question them, and it's difficult. It makes it difficult, and it's very draining. It's taxing on the spirit, even just your energy, you know, if you're having to just constantly just work twice as hard. And yeah, I think it's yeah, I think that is all kind of, it's linked to so many different other things with regards to being unable to take, you know, a lot of us aren't able to take unpaid internships, you know, things like that. It plays up to that. And so like, it's then you end up in a situation where, like, I might not have as much experience. This person here might have more experience working in this lab because they were able to work over the summer without pay, and I wouldn't have had the same privilege to do that. I would have to find some, you know what I mean? So there's so many different things that then affect you on paper, how good your science is, and your experiences might not match up, basically. But yeah, in terms of working in the different contexts, I think as much as I was able to kind of learn and take from different contexts and different fields, even I worked in different fields, there was always this underlying thing of, like, you know, is my work, not only research, but just work in general, is my effort good enough? Is it being looked at as good enough? So that's always something that plays, and I hope that, like, as we change for the better and change what science looks like, and I can see a lot of comments here that there is good science being done here, and we just need a platform to show it. We are working towards that, and it is going to change. We're going to have scientists that look exactly like us up there, and they don't have to go through all this. One day we'll get there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Fiona, and thank you for pointing out the comments. Here we have Professor Maria Bukutsa, who has stated that the other important aspect is for women scientists to consider commercializing their innovations, which can contribute to economic development in African countries, which is a missing or a weak link from science. And then we also have a comment from Rachel around the fact that our universities are actually good enough, and that part of what is missing is, you know, just publication because of this sort of bias that exists, and there's also just a privilege around who can access, you know, some of these journals in terms of like cost and pricing and these sorts of things. I want to briefly cut over, because I did promise a conversation around some of the pandemic impacts, and so I want to come to Dr. Esther. And really, you at the beginning of the pandemic, is there a beginning to a pandemic? I don't know. At the start of last year, you wrote a very powerful op-ed for All Africa, and you were just talking about, you know, while everyone is really focused on the health aspects, and all of these Western countries were just waiting for COVID to come through and cripple the continent, you were looking at other aspects of, you know, food insecurity and how the pandemic would affect this, and you made some pretty strong predictions around what would happen. That basically, if it wasn't going to be COVID, it was going to be hunger that would kill people on the continent. And I'm just wondering, a year plus into this experience that we're all having globally, where have your predictions come true? What are you seeing? And if you could just talk to us a little bit more about your policy work around food insecurity.
So thank you once again for that important point about food insecurity, which we know is still an issue. And yes, as Africans, we didn't care so much about this COVID-19 because, hey, we have much more serious issues, which is if you don't have food, if you're hungry, yes, there's the need to be able to have a full belly. And so a year later, nothing, we still are facing food insecurity. As a matter of fact, just this very recently, a new report by United Nations and other institutions, including the European Union, showed that yes, hunger and food insecurity is still at its record high, five-year record high, and it's only going to get worse because we have it's not only COVID-19, we have climate change, which has made agriculture almost some sector that can never now produce what we need to. And we have, of course, our countries, including Ethiopia, Southern Sudan, and Somalia. These are still some of the countries that conflict is still a big thing. And of course, Kenya is never far away from the list of countries that are still food insecure. So that has been a challenge for quite a long time. And I thank you, Anne, who talked about, agriculture. If we do not invest in agriculture as a sector, there's no way we will feed ourselves. And of course, agriculture has to be made sexy. It has to be sold. So we have to improve how we communicate about agriculture. No, you cannot keep on having these old women making the covers of agriculture magazines. I mean, agricultural scientists look like us. Excuse me, when you look at me, do I look like those women you're putting? So we have to change that image because we have now scientists like Anne, like Fiona, the scientists that are working tirelessly to ensure that our continent feeds ourselves. We're tired of seeing these commercials that just always portray the African as the person that's always angry. You don't portray us as the other people that are also looking beautiful and doing their part to actually change the face of these issues that our continent faces. So it's a lot of issues compounded together. And yes, unless we invest in agriculture and training from the word go, and also changing how we train in the institutions and commercializing our products, Professor Bukusu said, our products, we don't have to rely on products developed around the world. Context relevant products are so important. So we have to upgrade ourselves and continue to believing in the power of us. So I'm also charging everyone that's listening, do not wait for anybody to see your shine. Bring your shine on. You can do a lot. So first of all, upgrade your confidence. Don't wait for somebody to really see you or believe in your confidence. Keep going. Keep doing it. Eventually they'll see what you've done. So yeah, don't sit there and waste your years, your energetic years. Continue to innovate for the products that you can. Get around your community, find out what's so unique and the products that you can start to develop. When you make it, they will get it. They will buy it. When it's good, it's good. You cannot argue with something that's good. It's good. It will sell. So I think we have to continue to work to tackle food insecurity, but it's going to involve a lot. Of course, as I said, agriculture won't do it alone. Education, gender, and all these challenges that we already talked about. Ensuring that, yes, if you don't have assets, you don't have the title deed, how are you going to upgrade your land? You won't. If you won't even be able to get a lot, if you don't even have a decision on what is being planted, then how are you going to contribute as a 50% equal partner in the farming business? So we have to, it's going to take a lot, but I think we are doing it. The youth, Anne and the rest, go for it. Keep doing what you're doing. We believe in you and keep changing this face of agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Esther. So I see a question here, and I'll flip over to our quick Q&A. So there's a question here around, how do we create opportunities for African academics who are overseas already to be able to feel like they can come home and to have, things that they can engage with on the continent? And I think I really want to throw this to Anne and Judy, if you could each offer a comment as, PhDs who are currently on the continent. What are the things that are keeping you here? What's working that perhaps more people need to hear about? So Anne, if you just want to start, and then I'll go over to Ngina.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think the main thing that's keeping me here is the fact that we have this notion that West is best. That's been coming around a lot today. But I mean, here in Africa, we are also, I'm at University of KwaZulu-Natal. It's one of the best in terms of research in Africa. So it's knowing that I'm part of a really good institution, and that if I do go out, I can stand proudly and be like, okay, you know what, I come from this university and I can represent. Number two, it's also, I think Fiona mentioned this. She was talking about how we want to, as Africans, we want to address African problems. I think that's also another reason. I mean, if you go overseas, most of the cases that you'd probably be addressing an issue that the funders overseas find interesting. So here, the funding is being put into Africa, and we're trying to address these African solutions. So I think it's pretty humbling for me, and it's pretty exciting that I get to be in a place where I get to address these issues that could inform policy, inform decisions, and inform how, for example, farming, how we could look at farming in a different way. For example, my research, I'm looking at the use of waste, so food waste and also human excreta, which is your urine and your poo, and the potential to create fertilizer. We all know that sanitation in Africa is a huge problem. Not many people have sanitation. So with that, we're trying to change this notion that waste is not just waste, it can actually be a resource. So I'm here on the continent doing this research, which I see firsthand that, hey, here people do not have access to toilets. There's food waste that are happening here, and I'm creating a solution to that particular problem. So in short, that's why I'm here, and that's why, and I think if you are overseas, there are so many issues, so many issues that you can come in and touch in. And I think the best part is that you'll be contributing to bettering your own continent, your own country. So that's more than a good reason for you to come and work here.
Thank you so much for that, Anne. So I think part of it is just, this motivation of what are the issues you want to be solving for, and this being very driven by the idea that, you want to help find homegrown solutions. Ngina, I'm wondering if you can offer some comments on this question, and, what again is also helping keep you on the continent, and what opportunities you see for yourself as an early career researcher who's based here.
Thank you, Kari. I would be glad to give in my insights. I have been studying here. My PhD is currently at the University of Nairobi. But I have friends who study in Brazil, Germany, and we share and exchange notes. I agree with Elizabeth that it's a fear. Like, where do we begin when we come back home? So, first of all, it's important to note that, let me reiterate the words of Anne. Coming back home, I think, is a noble idea. And it gives one an opportunity to just give back. Just share the knowledge that you've gathered from abroad. So number one highlight would be networking. Sometimes we just focus more on books, and we forget about social life. So networking is very key, because once you come back home, your networks would really help in linking you up with some of the opportunities that are available. For us young people, it's also very important for us to know that it would be good to consider starting small, because fine, I have come back from Brazil, for example. I have my PhD, but not much of experience. So am I willing to begin as a junior researcher and not comparing myself with people who have been there 10, 15 years? So maybe even trying to look for opportunities and work with principal investigators who have maybe won funds, or just look for funding opportunities that then target junior researchers, for example. So just looking at available options, or if you have done something in agriculture, why not just start a farm of your own? It is just looking at the simple things we can be able to do. It is not a one dress fits all, and we cannot sit here and discuss wholeheartedly or cross-cutting issues that pertain to all the researchers or what could work for all, but just looking at your own situation, and trying to see what would work best for you, given the few highlights that have been given here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Therese here says, spot on, Ngina. Networking is the key. We have another comment by Professor Bakutsa. Africa is rich in many ways in terms of natural resources. Like Anne has said, we need re-education and to show the global food basket in the centuries in Africa, if well harnessed. I could not agree more. We have a huge agriculture influence in the space right now, and I quite love it because really we're not going to make it through the next century without food security. Fiona, I want to throw one question to you, which is, again, it sounds like there's a little bit of an opposition between, being in the West versus being here, and the fact that we have very limited investment by our governments in research and funding. Do you think that perhaps private capital is an option for really bolstering research that's taking place on the continent, and maybe some thoughts on that?
Yeah. It's something I was just thinking as we were having this discussion, and the idea of like, how can we create opportunities here for research and development, whether that's in industry, private sector, or in academia. Like, how can we ensure that there's funding to support people who are coming back with their PhDs, people coming back with their masters? Like, how can we ensure that they can have make money to live? Like, how can we ensure that? And I think with the poll at the beginning, just showing how little of our GDP is going into research, like, that's really crazy. We really need to change how our governments see what research is, that research isn't just, fun and games. It's really important. It's really important, and it's important to the development of the country, and that they need to really consider, thinking about it very seriously. How can we increase how much money we're putting into research as a country? And I think the same should be said to the private sector. We should talk to guys in the private sector and be like, okay, listen, we need to invest in research and development on the continent. Don't send your research and development abroad or wait for somebody to do the research abroad and bring it back. Like, why not do it here? And try and change their mindset a little bit in terms of really inputting the capital that they have and changing the percentage of that capital that they're channeling into research. How can we get them to change that and just increase that? I think also in general, we've got millionaires, billionaires on this continent. Like, can they please invest back in us and into the research? Like, how can we do that? I would be super interested to see, is there a way that we almost have to how we've been talking about making science sexy and attractive and, kind of thing. Is there a way that we can get them to be like, listen, you should give us money to do this research here? Like, invest your money here. Why don't we have our millionaires and billionaires set up foundations here for research, and not, and not only directly trying to address, our global issues, which is important. I'm not saying that it's not, but have a portion that also goes towards the research and development to answer these questions too. We'll all have the same objective at the end of the day. So I don't know whether it's trying to change mindset or what. I don't know what needs to be done, but we need to increase how much both government is investing, private sector is investing in research in general. And that way we can entice people with brains and ideas and all this and hardworking and, to come back and they'll be able to live, to make a living off of doing what they're good at and implementing their ideas. So I think that's, that we need to, how do we do it? That's the question. How do you get the government to change how much money they're spending on research?
And also get our billionaires to invest in research. So it's a two-pronged approach. So I have Victor Kari here, who's in the questions, basically just saying he's very encouraged to see young women as PhD fellows. There's been a perception that it's mostly senior men who are in PhDs. And there's a question around, what motivates you to want to pursue a PhD. So we have about 4 minutes left. I think I'll throw this question over to Ngina. If you could tell us a little bit about what motivated you on your research journey, on your academic journey. And then I think we can quickly just wrap up. In the comments, the chat, you will also see the All Africa op-ed of Dr. Ngumbi's that I referred to, where she had made some predictions around food security, if you'd like to read that. So Ngina, if you could just tell us what inspired your own academic journey. Okay.
Thank you, Kari.
There we go. Yes.
Okay. What inspired me to want to venture into research is growing up, I lived with my mother inside the university. My mother works for Egerton University today. So I schooled in a school inside the university. So as I walked from the school to her office, I would pass by doors written Professor so-and-so, Dr. so-and-so. So I was really curious to find out what does this mean, because my mother didn't hold that title. So I didn't quite understand then. And I just knew that I wanted that title ahead of my name. So growing up, it became clearer. And yeah, I opted to, after my undergraduate especially, I decided to just do my master's, and of course with the support of my parents. Then that I found myself in the space of social sciences, which I love. Yeah. So what I would say would encourage me or led me to where I am today is a support system. I have seen women in my family thrive and grow up the ladder of leadership. So I have seen role models who are female that have made it, and then that led me to believe that I can make it. So why not? My mother also encouraged me a lot to strive and be whoever person I want to be. Of course, there are many challenges to being a woman in science, and maybe this we would share on another platform. Yeah, because you don't know how to balance between being a career woman, starting your family, raising kids, and having all that succeed, because society will judge you harshly if one fails, apparently. So, yeah, as women in the research field, just a support system and the individual drive towards what you want to achieve, I would say that really contributes a lot to having women in science or women in research. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ngina. There's another question here that unfortunately we will not have time for as we have run out of our allotted time. This is from an anonymous attendee around how scientists can incorporate indigenous knowledge. I would ask them to really look into Professor Mary Abakuta's work, who is doing really great stuff at JKU around indigenous plants and horticulture, and really trying to encourage their use as food crops and also for medicinal properties. So look up Professor Mary Abakuta. Ruth, if you could just type that in our chat. And I think that is a good starting point for that discussion, how we can indigenize science. And I think it's a really fantastic question. I, of course, have so many more questions I want to ask you all, and I feel like I could talk to you for quite some time. Unfortunately, we've run out of our time. So really quickly to everyone who joined us, we're going to have a survey at the end of this. So as you log off, if you could just please take that survey to help us know how we did. I want to thank all of the panelists for their contributions. You are all just very inspiring women and scientists, and on this Africa Day, it's really great to just hear from African voices that are really trying to transform the continent through big ideas. If you want to find Anne Chisa, you can find her podcast, The Root of the Science, wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you would like to learn more about Fiona Moejes, you can find her on LinkedIn just by searching at Fiona Moejes. You can also find her on Twitter. I believe Ruth is going to share some links as well for folks interested in finding out more. If you would like to find out more about Ngina's research and her work in Dadaab, there is a website that will be shared where you can learn more about the work she's doing there. And last but not least, if you would like to follow Dr. Esten Goombi's work. She's very popular on Twitter. I was telling her this. And she also has a website, www.estengoombing.com. I don't know if anyone wants to give us one last comment or word or something that's just really eating at you that you would like to get out there before we all return to our individual spaces. Thank you so much to the Mawazo team as well, who's helped organize this. I hope that the folks who attended this will join us for more events, and I look forward to seeing you out in the world at some point in the day. All right, thanks everyone. Bye.